Hello and welcome to our webinar. Topic for the day is priority of service for veterans and eligible spouses. I would like to introduce you to Mr. Exit Smith.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Exit Smith, the State Veteran Program Coordinator. I am so glad that you're here. We're really excited about this training. We just had some new policies come out. This morning, I'm going to be talking about priority of service for veterans and eligible spouses. And then I'm going to turn it over to Mark Brennan. He's going to talk about veteran intake. It's another policy that just came out recently. But first of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank all of our veterans, both JVHG staff and our Career Center staff, for your service. You know, being a retired Marine, I understand, what it means to serve, the sacrifices that you have to make. And I want to make sure that I start off the day by saying thank you. Absolutely thank you for your service. I also want to thank all of our Career Center staff for what you do for Florida's veterans every day. The governor wants Florida to be the most friendly veteran state in the union. And I believe that you play a large part in that. You are the first person that a veteran or eligible spouse sees when they come into the Career Center. So a lot of times their experience is really gonna start with what they experience when they walk through the door. So just want to say thank you. I hope you get something out of this training. And let's get into some of our objectives and what we're going to talk about. So during this presentation, we're going to cover the priority of service, the key terms, the definitions. We're going to cover authorizations, the guidance. What's the scope and purpose? The implementation, including identifying veterans and eligible spouses, verifying veteran status, mandatory Career Center procedures and activities, applying and recording priority of service, and then some of our best practices from career centers throughout the state, because we definitely have some best practices out there. Okay, and as I said, we're going to hold questions to the end, but let's go ahead and get started. So a veteran, this would be our first term. This is an individual who served at least one day of active military service and was not separated under dishonorable conditions. So what we're talking about here is active duty. It's not boot camp, it's not their training, but their actual duty stations. This is a person that's on active duty and they did not receive a dishonorable discharge. Any other discharge is fine. It can be other than honorable, it can be general, it can even be a bad conduct discharge, but it cannot be the worst dishonorable discharge. Those folks are not even considered veterans. Also, an eligible spouse of a veteran. Now, the eligible spouse of a veteran can be eligible for priority of service if that veteran has died of a service-connected disability, the veteran has a total service-connected disability rating of 100%. We also call that being 100% service-connected, or they died while that total disability rating was still in existence. So military spouses, these are spouses of active duty service people. Now, these military spouses may be entitled to priority of service if they meet the definition of what an eligible spouse is. And that means that that service member for more than 90 days has been one of the following: either missing in action, captured in the line of duty, or forcibly detained by a foreign government or power. Also, the definition of qualified job training program. So what is that? So that's any program that's funded in whole or in part by the Department of Labor. A covered person. So what does the term covered person mean? That means any individual who meets the definition of either a veteran or an eligible spouse, and that person is eligible for priority of service. And then finally, a non-covered person. And that's an individual who is not either a veteran or an eligible spouse. And finally, what we're here for, priority of service. So priority of service pretty much brings together all the terms that we've defined so far. And priority of service provides veterans and eligible spouses priority over non-covered persons for the receipt of employment, training, and placement services provided under a qualified job training program. So you can see we just tied all of those key terms together into our definition of priority of service. So priority of service for covered persons was authorized by the Jobs for Veterans Act 2002, and it was codified under Title 38 United States Code. Now in 2010, the Department of Labor, through the release of 20 Code CFR 1010, communicated instructions to all recipients of DOL funds, just like our career centers, to implement or enhance their current policies and procedures to ensure that adequate priority of service protocols are in place. Now this year, the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, that's us, published Administrative Policy 111. It just came out last week. Priority of service for veterans and eligible spouses. Administrative Policy 111 outlines the minimum requirements for local workforce development boards, that's you, to implement priority of service for all programs funded by DOL in whole or in part. Now, some of the qualified job training programs in the Career Center that must provide priority of service include, but are not limited to, WIOA, Title I. That includes adult, dislocated worker, and the youth. Wagner-Pizer, migrant seasonal farm worker, TAA or trade adjustment assistance, national dislocated worker grants, and finally, the Senior Community Service Employment Program. Priority of service was enacted to demonstrate our nation's gratitude for the sacrifices made by veterans and, at times, their spouses. Offering priority of service to these programs is a small way of offering appreciation to our nation's veterans and eligible spouses who take part in our workforce development programs and services. It's kind of our way of saying thank you for your service. So this is a great spot to go ahead and do a knowledge check to see how you're receiving this information. So to be eligible for priority of service, an individual must have served at least how many days in the active U.S. military? Remember, that means after their training, after their boot camp. Is it A, 30, B, 180, or C, 1? That answer is going to be C. For priority of service purposes, you only need to serve 1 day of active duty. All right. Let's try number 2 here. Now, which workforce programs are required to provide priority of service? A, WIOA, B, Wagner-Pizer, C, trade adjustment assistance, or D, all of the above? D, all of the above. And now that we've learned what priority of service is and who it applies to, let's discuss how we implement priority of service in the Career Center. Now, implementation of priority of service begins with identifying covered persons in the Career Center. State and local federal guidance requires local workforce development boards to establish local policies and procedures to identify covered persons at the point of entry and encourage individuals to self-identify as veterans and eligible spouses. Now, this may be accomplished through various efforts, including, but not limited to, ensuring that our Career Center staff identify covered persons at the Career Center point of entry by asking if they or their spouse have ever served in the United States military. We also encourage individuals to self-identify as covered persons by displaying prominent signage regarding priority of service throughout the Career Center. Also, implementing questions to the Career Center electronic kiosk system for customer intake so they can identify as covered persons. And we also provide information on priority of service through orientations, both online and in person. And finally, prominently displaying information on priority of service on the local workforce development board's websites. These are all great ways. And by the way, this flyer is out there. It's on your floridajobs.org website. You can go there under resources, under veterans. You can go ahead and print that off, use that, make it your own if you would like. So earlier we defined the term veteran. Now something some of you may not be aware of is that many individuals who are veterans may not think of themselves as such, perhaps because they may have never served in combat. So therefore, it's important to ensure that Career Center staff ask if the individual, if they or their spouse has ever served in the United States military. And that way we can ensure that all veterans are informed of their eligibility through priority of service. Welcome to CareerSource Capital Region. Have you or your spouse ever served in the military? Or you can just implement your CareerSource. Now, it's not appropriate to require verification of veteran status at the point of entry. Self-attestation, that means just what they say, we take their word for it, is sufficient for access to most employment services. Now, the only services requiring verification of a veteran status are those that require a commitment of outside resources or funding. Basically, money or occupational skills training or other support services provided through WIOA. These things all cost dollars. It's a good rule of thumb. When something starts to cost money, we're going to need a little verification. There's many ways you can verify whether someone's a veteran, DD 214, and so on. The application of priority of service varies depending upon eligibility requirements of the program. Now, the four basic categories of qualified job training programs are the universal access programs. That means these are accessible by anyone, right? Programs with eligibility criteria, such as WIOA, statutory programs, and also our discretionary programs. Veterans and eligible spouses receive access to universal access programs before or instead of non-covered persons. Now, for example, if there's a waiting list to use a resource room computer, say you're in a small place, maybe like Crawfordville, the covered person moves to the front of that list. Now, this is not to be construed with replacing a person who's already seated behind the computer or asking someone to vacate a computer that they're already using. All right, covered persons, veterans or eligible spouses do not supplant non-covered persons who are already in receipt of the resource, just to make that clear. Now, programs with eligibility criteria are programs which contain eligibility requirements, and those must first be met to be considered eligible for participation. Now, once the veteran or eligible spouse is determined to be eligible for that participation, they will also receive priority of service within that specific program, such as your WIOA. The programs, okay, those are such as your WIOA adult, your dislocated worker, or even your youth, maybe by age or selective service. Now, priority of service does not exempt covered persons from program eligibility requirements. Now, a veteran or eligible spouse must meet all the relevant eligibility criteria to be considered eligible for the participation in a program. For example, as discussed, WIOA adult, the dislocated worker, and the youth. They require every participant to meet those specific program eligibility requirements. That could be such as age, recently separated from employment, or something like that. In addition to the eligibility criteria that all participants are required to meet, programs with statutory priorities have priorities that target certain populations and establish a rank order for enrolling or serving participants. Now, veterans and eligible spouses must first meet both that program's eligibility and the statutory priority criteria to receive priority of service. The federal mandate cannot be waived. Now, since there is no federal mandate for programs with discretionary priorities, veterans and eligible spouses who are eligible for these programs automatically qualify for priority of service. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act establishes a statutory priority requirement for adult employment and training activities. Now, under this requirement, Career Center staff, when using the WIOA adult funds to provide individual career services, training services, or both, must give priority to low-income individuals, either in receipt of public assistance or individuals who are basic skills deficient. Now, as discussed, veterans and eligible spouses continue to receive priority of service for all DOL-funded job training programs, including WIO Adult. Career centers must apply the priority of service within the statutory subgroup as the order is shown. So that first group is going to be your veterans or eligible spouses, those that we call covered persons, who are either low income, receiving public benefits, or basic skill deficient. The second priority are going to be those non-covered persons that are either low income, receiving public benefits, or are basically skill deficient. And then thirdly is going to be those veterans or eligible spouses that do not meet that group of low income, public benefit receipt, and basic skills deficient. And there is actually a fourth group, which is a non-covered person who also does not fall into any of those categories. Programs with statutory income criteria, such as WIO Adult, should note that most income related to service must not be considered in eligibility assessments. Now, this includes compensation for service-connected disabilities or death, educational assistance like the MGI Bill, training and rehabilitation payments to disabled veterans, or survivor-dependent education assistance. Now, with that being said, the military retirement pension would count as income. But if a person just got out of the military, that money that they were making for that last 6 months as an active duty service member is not going to count into that calculation for WIOA. WIOA staff must also not require veterans or eligible spouses to exhaust their entitlements to VA-funded training benefits prior to enrollment into WIOA. All right, we've gone through about 3/4 of our presentation here. Let's have another knowledge check. So which is one of the 4 categories, there's only one answer here, which is one of the 4 categories of qualified job training programs? Is it A, universal health care programs, B, governor's initiative programs, C, programs with statutory priorities, or D, programs with discrete priorities? The answer is C. Excellent. Okay, one more. What income may be included when determining eligibility for programs such as WIOA Adult? Is it A, Veterans Affairs and Educational Assistance? Is it B, VA disability payments? C, military retirement pension? Or D, military reserve tuition assistance? So remember, the only payment that is going to count towards the WIOA calculation is going to be that military retirement pension. None of the monies that the veteran made while they're on active duty is going to count, and none of their disabled veteran or their educational benefit is going to count. Okay, now reporting priority of service. This has not changed, but it's always good to go over. So the automated code 089. So when a covered person self-identifies at the point of registration in Employ Florida, the system will automatically generate a service code 089. We all know that. Okay, veteran priority of service notification on the participant's Wagner Positive Program application. Now, I will say this, as a best practice, it is important to still ensure that the covered person, whether it be a veteran or eligible spouse, fully understands what priority of service means, even if they've already received the system's automatic 089. We know that most times when people are going through something, they're just clicking buttons. So it's great to take that extra second to fully explain what priority of service means to our veterans and eligible spouses. Next code, staff generated 189. So this staff generated code, if the veteran doesn't self-identify through Employ Florida or the kiosk, upon identification, that first staff member that identifies them must explain priority of service and then must put the code into their file and enter a case note in accordance with the Employ Florida Service Code Guide. Best practice is that the person who is putting The Career Center staff member that's putting this 189 code in for our veterans should either be that front end staff member or that first employment services person that veteran sees. It shouldn't be that this veteran makes it all the way through and gets back to a DVOP before they receive a 189 code. That's just the best practice. And when we get monitored and audited and stuff like that, that is something that the feds will definitely look at. At what point did this person receive priority of service? And remember, it's Employ Florida. All someone knows is what they see. So if they look into the system, into Employ Florida, and all they see is that the DVOP's given the 189 every time, that's doesn't matter that you might have done it in the front. If it's not in Employ Florida, it didn't happen. So shown here is an example of a case note for a staff-assisted provision of priority of service, which meets the required elements as prescribed by our Employment Florida Service Code Guide. You can see there, here's the veteran, here's who they met, what are they entitled to, the available programs, the services, and the eligibility requirements of those areas of interest. Has not changed. Now, Administrative Policy 111, as I suggested, that just came out, mandates that the local veteran employment representative provide priority of service training to our local center, veteran center, and our local staff every year. This is your local veteran employment representative, as we call a leaver. Now, in the absence of that leaver, another Career Center staff may provide the training, except for our DVOPs. We do not want our DVOPs doing this training. Okay, they are not allowed. But it should either be the leaver, the veteran program manager, maybe a center manager, or someone else, but not the DVOP. Although priority of service training is only required on an annual basis, it is encouraged that training be conducted as often as possible. That will preserve skills and it will ensure that all our staff are aware well of all the elements of priority of service and how to implement it proficiently. And I hope that this training will also help you with that. Now, the U.S. Department of Labor monitors the implementation of operations of programs to ensure that priority of service is observed. Now, monitoring is the results of the Veteran Employment and Training Services, that's VETS, and the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. Now, DEO and VETS will monitor the requirements and local operating procedures established by you, the local workforce development boards, including but not limited to ensuring that covered persons are notified of their entitlement to priority of service, enabling individuals to identify themselves as veterans or eligible spouses at the point of entry, monitoring the implementation and the reporting of priority of service, and ensuring continuous priority of service training. These things are all going to be monitored. Now, here are a few of our best practices that are currently being implemented across the state. And as I stated earlier, now not every CareerSource center will have the capability to provide the same benefits. You know, as I say, Palm Beach is not going to look the same as Pensacola, is not going to look the same as Chipola or Okaloosa. These are all going to look a little bit different. But at a minimum, career centers must provide covered persons with services before or instead of non-covered persons. Best practices such as these are encouraged when feasible. They're not mandated due to the individual center limitations, but here are some of the examples that we've come across. Reserving computers for veterans in the resource room. That's probably not possible, as I say, maybe in Crawfordville or in Chipola, but in some places that may be. Career Center screensavers featuring priority of service information. That could be done everywhere. Veteran-specific workshops. Veteran resource rooms and meeting areas for disabled veterans who are not comfortable in large crowds. When you have a workshop, setting aside a percentage of the space for veterans until, say, 48 hours prior. Maybe having a veteran hiring fair, or just reserving the first hour of all of your hiring fairs for veterans. And last but not least, prioritizing veterans when referring job seekers to job order vacancies in Employ Florida. And these are just some examples of some of our best practices, and you may have many yourself, even ones that we didn't put in this slideshow. And we're, every quarter, we send out that Veterans Managers Quarterly Report. It always asks for best practices. Even when we come out with the new one, it'll still ask for best practices. And we absolutely enjoy reading what you're doing in our career centers every day. So here are some resources that are available. As I've talked about, Administrative Policy 111 just came out this last week. Administrative Policy 105, some of the fact sheets for priority of service and wheel adult funds, that brand new priority of service poster, which I hope you'll utilize in your CareerSource, and of course, Teagle 1009. Now, here's our contact information. I would ask that if you do contact myself, Exit Smith, or one of my local regional coordinators, Mark Brennan, Local Workforce Development Boards 1 through 9, Wilda Carrozza, Local Workforce Development Boards 14 through 19, including 24, or Eric Casio, Local Workforce Development Boards 10 through 13, or 20 through 23, that you please CC your veteran program manager or your center staff manager. We want to make sure that we're keeping everyone in the loop. I do appreciate all of your time today. I hope you all have a great day. And remember, we're always here to help. Okay, great. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.